Welcome to GDC. We're at another live person event. It's very exciting. Human corporeal form.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
It's novel. So, Jeff, well met, first off.
Nice to meet you too.
Not a lot of these am I meeting the person literally, essentially as we sit down to do this, but it's always a real pleasure because rather than asking questions that I sort of secretly know the answer to, but for the benefit of future listeners, I'm kind of teeing up things. I genuinely know almost nothing about you.
Okay.
So I'm just going to learn, and hopefully anybody listening will enjoy the ride along with me.
Hopefully.
So you are one of those people that I find very frustrating because you have a lot of talents and you do a lot of different things and wear a lot of different hats. And that's always intimidating as someone who's very sort of thematic in his skill set. So I kind of just wanted to start from the basics. And since you do, a lot of things, that means clearly where you are today is probably a lot of different life threads that have kind of come together to form this 2022, version of you.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious where that traces back to. Like, for example, growing up, how did you discover, what put you on the path is probably the better way to phrase it, towards this kind of work?
I would say probably my old man, Ralph. So my dad used to work for Roland, and they hired him because he invented a sequencer, which became the Roland microcomposer. And he invented this stuff in the early 70s. And
what was the context by which he invented?
The context was that he was really into electronics. He was also a jazz musician, and he combined the two to a degree. And
pretty high level.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to be a jazz musician and sort of dabble in technology, but he obviously really knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing.
From a tech or an engineering maybe standpoint.
Yes, and a musical standpoint too, which is really interesting. Like he really understood jazz, but he also really understood low-level electronics. And then eventually, actually, he went into programming and stuff. So he was really down that path. And so he, there's no surprise I was inspired by it.
Where is this happening, by the way? Where did you grow up?
In Vancouver, Canada. Yeah. So, he would go to recording studios in Vancouver and do sessions.
As a musician? As
a session player.
Wow.
And then, of course...
Playing what?
He would play vibraphones, Rhodes, piano, occasionally accordion, glockenspiel.
Basically whatever was needed that day.
Yeah, I mean, it was all kind of keyboard-oriented instruments, but,
but
they're all...
percussion is kind of its own specialty, so to just kind of casually toss that in there definitely knows what he's doing.
He did. And so he would take me along with him to these sessions as a young lad, and I would watch these seasoned veteran musicians just looking at charts and, one or two takes and just nail it. And it was just so impressive, and I loved the camaraderie of the musicianship.
It's the best.
I was fascinated by engineering and the studio and the tape machine. Occasionally they would let me be the tape op, which was a lot of fun, and then, and through that, because my dad started working for Roland, he started doing trade shows and going to the NAMM show. And then he started meeting people like Toto and Michael Jackson and different people, and becoming a tech guru for some of these people. Several times I went down to LA with my dad to hang out with him while he was working with Toto. He actually worked on Toto 4 on that album with Rosanna and Africa and all that.
Wow.
And they credited him as special thanks to Ralph Shirt Simple Dyck. And the reason why they said that is because they would say, hey, Ralph, we need our prophet to talk to our Oberheim, and make him layer up and pre-MIDI.
Yeah, exactly.
And he'd go, sure, it's simple, and he'd make some little interface box for them that connects one keyboard to another. So Again, I was watching a lot of this happen, and
that's a real unicorn in those days. Somebody who could do that.
Yeah,
he may be like literally the person who could, not even a class that's small, but just guy.
He was a very unique individual.
Sounds like
and
it.
So I mean, I suppose I
did
just
he
got so
expose you?
inspired by that.
Sorry to cut you off.
right.
I'm just the thing that is so cool about that is sometimes parents will bring their kids along to these kinds of things. It could range anything from pragmatic necessity of, well, there's no babysitter lined up, so you got to come with me to work, all the way to, I want to plant a seed with them, and like I'm actively there. This is a deliberate exposure to a thing that may really set them down a path. Did you have a sense of where you were? And was he hoping that you would gravitate towards this kind of thing, or was it more just, hey, I'm going to do a cool thing. You want to come watch?
Yeah, probably more the latter. Like I don't think he had any grand plans for me to do this. And also you got to remember, like, it's obviously really hard to make it in the music biz. So
it's partly why I asked. A lot of parents kind of actively discourage it because it's like they're trying to spare their kid the heartbreak.
Look, I actually discouraged my daughter, and she went to uni to study music production, and she's already starting to work in games. So,
well, then let's create the mythology that he wouldn't have wanted you either, so we can have a multi-generational failure process of discouragement that is then followed by success from the rebellion offspring.
Exactly.
I mean, because it's amazing. I mean, the fact that you would have a front row seat to such a high level of the business. It's like I live in Los Angeles, and every now and again, most people who live there don't live there, or not from there, I should say. And so they, have their stories all begin. Oh, well, in Boston, I was the only one who wanted to do this, or in Denver, I grew up in Denver. A lot of that kind of thing. But every now and again, you meet an Angelino who actually is from there, and they're always this kind of novel creature.
Right.
But every, a good number of them, you'll hear these stories where they grew up, just on movie sets or at the scoring stages or whatever. And I always thought, I can't even fathom the impact on my childhood. In a way, I'm almost glad I didn't have it, because I think it would be so easy to not fall in love with it, to see it as that's just normal, banal life stuff like that's mom and dad's work. That's not anything exciting. And because to all the outsiders, these things have a mystique, where you just think, I get to go to a city where they actually record music there. This is mind blowing. So it's cool that I love that you kind of somehow got the best of both. You got exposed to, there's not much above, especially for that time period, Toto's and Michael Jackson's. I mean, where do you go? It's not like scrounging around with a bunch of sort of B-listers, as it were. I mean, it's like, so you got this dose that's unbelievable. And yet it actually caused a spark and not a rebellious child. I don't want to do anything to do with music.
Yeah, and I think I saw him doing it. And I thought, I can do that. I think I could do that. And I do I do a subset of what he did. Definitely, I'm not a jazz musician, and my programming is super rusty. And,
fair enough.
You know what I mean? But it was more like, okay, I think I can. I thought I was just going to give it a go, and I see that in my daughter too. She's seen me doing what I do, and she goes, I can do that. She's inspired by it, which is really cool. Yeah.
Well, so then let's try to close the gap between then and now, where, because you first got into games, give or take 20 years ago, right? So what led to that first entry point? Especially because 20 years ago was a very different landscape than today in terms of entry points for people. So what was yours?
That was one of those luck moments, I think. A friend of mine saw an ad in a free employment paper.
Is it in Vancouver still?
In Vancouver. It was Electronic Arts looking for an audio programmer. And I, at the time, was spinning my wheels in various pop bands trying to make it, and was not getting anywhere.
What's your instrument?
My instrument is keyboard.
Okay.
So
So just living the life of a gigging musician.
Oh yeah, and starving. Was not doing well.
Famously, that is the default position in that line of work.
But I mean, look, the thing I was into was I was down with early MIDI sequencers and samplers and synths and programming, and my dad was making MIDI sequencers on computers now, and I was understanding that, and I had played around with enough recording equipment that I knew how to produce music. In the sort of early composer form of it, as I was learning, getting my chops. And, but, I was lucky I was in a band that had a song on the local radio that was getting a little bit of airplay, And anyway, so I went and applied for this audio programmer job, even though I'm not a programmer. And it was just to get my foot in the door, because I thought maybe if I go there and show off all my stuff that I can do, that maybe they'll just take me on anyways. This is really how I went in there.
But to get your foot in the door with an eye towards achieving what with that?
I wanted to do video game audio. I was playing NHL hockey on the Sega Genesis with my friends, and
got it, I see. So
and I could tell, oh, okay, well, there's obviously a little MIDI sequencer in there, and there's a synth and stuff, and I can do this. I think I could actually do better than what the EA did on there, right? And so I went in for the job interview and met some other audio people that were there, and I connected with all of them quite nicely. But then I was put into a room full of programmers, and they started grilling me on my programming ability. And I basically said, well, yeah, I don't really know how to do that, but I'm really good at learning on the job. So maybe one of you guys could just give me a bit of help when I need to program a driver or something. And anyway, so I went home, and the next day I got the thanks but no thanks letter. No big surprise. And I was really bummed because I thought, wow, that was the moment. That was the moment that was going to be that was going to be how I get into something, the turning point. And I really felt that I missed it, and I was really bummed out. And 2 weeks later, they phoned me back and they said, hey, you're clearly not a good programmer, but would you like to come on board and help us with sound effects on a hockey game? And I went, yeah. And then 2 weeks later.
A Canadian interested in hockey?
Yeah, exactly. 2 weeks later, I'm now hired. They've put me into an office with a beautiful view of the mountains in Vancouver. I've got this thing called a Macintosh, which I'm like, what the hell is this? Crazy Sega Genesis hardware development kits and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I'm making sound effects in an FM synth. And I'm, then they're starting to say, hey, can you write music? And I'm like, yeah. And then I wrote some music on a game called Skitchin. And I had to pinch myself to go, am I dreaming? Because this is exactly what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah, that foot in the door that you were looking for. You kind of shortcut somehow shortcut around the thing that was supposed to be the paying your dues portion.
I feel like I paid my dues trying to do it in the pop scene.
I just
mean
what I mean? In EA, that
EA,
gamble you were making of I'll get in on this thing and kind of work my way towards the part
I guess actually a classic way of getting into games is going into the QA.
Right, of course.
And testing, and then showing the devs that you know how to do something, and then they might take you in. But yeah, I bypassed that. And
in fact, the funny thing is that, as a tangent on that, I keep hearing more and more sort of whispers that's increasingly sort of not true, because QA departments, the big ones, that's such specialized work, and to be able to really effectively QA a game has gotten so complicated that it's not really entry level work anymore the way it used to be. Like just play the game, report bugs. It's like, no, you got to really know, and it helps to have somebody that's kind of their passion. It's just one of those funny things that just, in the same way that you're brought on, can you just do some sound effects? And it's kind of like, oh, by the way, I guess we could use some music. And now it's the world of composing is so elaborate and so complicated, and the vetting process is often very elaborate. But in any case, all right. So you were writing music and you were doing sound effects.
Yep.
And how long did that last? What was
I was at EA for about 5 years, from 92 to 97.
Were you gigging during that time also?
I was actually, yeah. I was I had a progressive rock band at that point called the Heavy Lounge. And And we were all just getting more into that sort of progressive thing. Primus was really popular at the time, and the grunge thing. So this was like a combination of all those sort of things. So I was playing, I was composing at work, and I was composing and I was doing sound design and implementation. It was all very technical, and I was just loving it. The games I worked on was a lot of like, I did a lot of EA Sports stuff. A lot of the very first version of franchises that are still going. So like I did the very first FIFA and first couple FIFAs, and
it's crazy how long those games.
Oh, I know they're still going. I mean, NHL is.
It's like The Simpsons, you know.
Yeah, it is.
Season 40. You know,
exactly. It's exactly like that. You know, it's crazy these are still going, and it was amazing to be there at the beginning. And you know, obviously the games are completely different now. Oh, yeah. You know, because of the technology. But
not to mention that FIFA has become like as or more famous for its music licensing as a kind of almost like a tastemaker venue now. It has become in so many ways what before was, you know, the record label executives whose job is to kind of decide who gets to hear what, and they make the hits as a result. You know, they're the one deciding this is going to be the thing we send to the radio. I feel like FIFA in particular seems to have that kind of mystique of this is a game that people know they're going to hear music they've never heard, and it's going to have all these artists. That's like what launches their career, especially in the world of like hip hop, and it's true.
It's really interesting the way that's
apart from what you're talking about.
Well, and interestingly, in '97 is when EA said, "Oh, we're going to start licensing music," and I went, "See ya."
Right.
That was my cue to get out of there, because I didn't want to become, you know, part of the team that's, you know, working licensing deals.
A music supervisor type.
I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to be the guy writing. Also, after 5 years of writing sports themes and stuff, I was like, okay, I think I need a bit of diversity in my composition. And so, interestingly, I had married an Australian named Angela. She worked at EA as well. And we lived in Vancouver for a while, but she was getting pretty tired of the rain in Vancouver, as it rains there a lot. And she wanted to move back to Australia, and I tagged along, and I moved to Australia with her. And just, you know, I was at that point in my life where it's like I should do a big move like this and just try something different.
Yeah, it's never going to be easier, probably.
Exactly. You know, like if things fall apart, I can pick up the pieces from this, you know, easily. And I went down there, and interestingly, by going down to Australia, I somehow met the right people and became involved with Creative Assembly. Creative Assembly, who are in the UK and are responsible for the Total War series.
Oh yes, I know it well.
Yeah, and so interestingly, they were doing EA Sports stuff before they did Total War, and it was that EA Sports overlap.
Because I was going to say, how do you move, you know, the exact wrong direction relative to the UK and then land in their lap, so to speak.
Exactly. And what it was is that EA Australia wanted Australian sports games, so rugby, AFL,
crocodile wrestling, and
pretty much,
Bowie
you know,
knife hunting, and
nothing that exciting. It was more like cricket, you know.
Yeah,
but
no, I stand by my you know, stereotypes of Australians. You know, it's like a Friday night is going out and wrestling kangaroos or something.
Exactly. It's so. Then Creative Assembly went, well, they didn't want to keep doing sports stuff, and they wanted to get into something interesting, and they came up with this idea of Shogun Total War, and then they asked me, Jeff, could you do authentic Japanese music? And of course I said, well, of course, easy. Meanwhile, of course, I have no idea what this stuff sounds like.
Every story,
you know what I mean?
It's every person classic. I've ever talked to exactly. It is classic. It is the narrative of, you know, believe in yourself to either figure it out on the job or know that the moment you hang up the phone, you can find someone to call to say, I need your help with this. I always tell, if I'm talking to students and things especially, I always say, you know, especially if you're at that phase in your career where you just need anything to stand on professionally from a credits standpoint or a reputation standpoint, or even just a pragmatic experience standpoint where you just need to have logged some hours doing this thing to get better at it.
Yep.
Always just say yes, whether you can do it or not. Because the chances are you will be able to learn, and no one really knows. I mean, I'm sure you would relate to the sentiment that, now that, I've been doing this not quite as long as you, but my first title around just shortly after you hooked up with these guys was when I first got in. So I think 2005 or 6 was when I first began. So it was about 15, 16 years. And what I have found is that over the span of that, every year that goes by, I find my sort of steadfire, I know what I'm doing, seems to go down because I learn so much more than I ever previously knew, that it's like there's just so much to learn. Yes. Your ego gets smaller and smaller and smaller over time, which I think is healthy. I think it's supposed to be how it goes.
It feels right.
But the result is that, I say, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. And then I sit down to write and I go, I'm so much more aware of the number of possibilities is exponentially beyond what I would have considered the possibilities of how to approach this 10 years ago, that it's sort of almost more intimidating. But in any case, yes. So yes, you were like, yes, I can write Japanese music.
Yep. And of course, then I immediately started learning how that started working, and I gave it a go, and it was using all the typical Japanese instruments. And then
obviously now we're kind of skipping past the technological evolution in the industry in the interim from the days of FM synthesis for a Genesis game to now you're actually recording instruments and actually having sessions and things like that.
Exactly. So all the music was streamed now, so now it's like, okay, actually we got to be able to mix things in the studio and make them sound good. Yeah, I mean, I was quite happy about that because, at the time, having the FM synth and the square wave generator and the noise generator as your only thing was very limiting. And, we made the most of it. We look back at it now and we call it chip tunes, and it's charming. And I've actually had to do some recently. And it was fun to dabble around in that again. But back then, it was like, let's stream stuff. Let's hire musicians. Let's increase the quality.
That, tail into the 90s, arriving into the early 2000s, when there was a real sudden shift towards recording instruments and even recording orchestras. And I'll never forget, I was really big into the Sierra and LucasArts point and click adventures as a player, just growing up. Late 80s, early 90s, Monkey Island, all that kind of thing. And I was a big fanboy. I was like obsessed with that lineage of LucasArts games, which culminated really in Grim Fandango. And Peter McConnell, for that score, went and found these really distinctive solo musicians, so that it wasn't, because it's it's this hybridization of like 40s film noir with Mexican Day of the Dead. So it'd have this like scorching, gorgeous mariachi trumpet next to the greasiest sax solo, and there were such distinctive performances. It was one of those you just hadn't heard video game music like that because chip tunes. That's just one of the limitations of that, and it's a very powerful type of expression. I don't use the term chiptune in any kind of derogatory way.
No.
But it is a different thing. If you need a saxophone player who can just grease their way through a solo, that's just fundamentally outside the tool set. So to me, it was always an exciting time, as a music lover, hearing games start to include things that other music form, whether it's records or film and TV music, that kind of thing, that already had laid claim to for the better part of a century at that point.
That's right.
So it was exciting. So
the thing that was really interesting too was like, there's certain things we kind of lost in the interactivity because with MIDI and synthesis and stuff, you can just increase the tempo of the song and it plays faster.
Yeah.
You can tell this thing to transpose up an octave or down or whatever, or just up a tone, and that can influence the vibe of the music to the game, right? And now when we switched to linear music, it was more limited now because we can't really change the track because we're just streaming a single track. And while certain things improved in quality, we did lose that interactivity until some people started going, okay, let's think outside of this, and layers and samples and breaking things down and forcing that linear thing back to being more interactive, which was also a very interesting sort of transition around then, which has really gone nuts over the last, I would say, 5 or 10 years for sure, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm just lucky I got in when I did, because that's like my big passion is, you know, music design and interactive systems built on, you know, also nicely recorded, great sounding stuff. That's always been my kind of white whale of how do I take what is a fundamentally linear art form, which is recording music and letting performers sort of tell a story, which requires A to B to C. You need that passage of time. Well, that's linear.
Yep.
How do you pull the thread of that passage of time? Or even more consequentially, how do you make a player able to pull that thread in whichever way they're going to do it? And it's, you know, I feel like we still haven't written that perfect video game score that sort of somehow is just deeply, deeply interactive, but not in a gimmicky step sequencer kind of way, which tends to be where that goes. You know, it's like, it's just kind of this Steve Reich, endless sort of things that can overlap and interchange, and which, like, of course, if you write music like that, it's sort of cheating. How could you do, you know, a Beethoven symphony that unfolds, you know, like a choose your own adventure or something?
It's interesting. That would be a massive challenge, but, you know, I think there's going to be people doing that, you know.
Well, it's certainly a passion of mine. I always try to, each project, try to figure out a way to incorporate that.
That's cool.
And so, but all that said, one thing I'm curious about, just in the minutia, is where were you able to find musicians to record these instruments in Australia?
Interestingly
not
enough,
that far from Japan relative to Vancouver.
This is it. And there's quite a few Japanese people in Australia.
What part of Australia were you in?
At the time, I was living at the Gold Coast, which is close to Brisbane. And for Shogun, I found, what did I do? I think what I did is I actually went to the Japanese Cultural Center that was there and met some Japanese people. And I said, does anybody here play any Japanese instruments? And they said, oh, there's a koto player here, and talked to her. And then we met up, and unfortunately she wasn't really she didn't play very well, but she had a beautiful koto, and I ended up sampling her, doing some riffs and then just one-offs, you know, and then that's more or less what I used for that. And then I rather than making it so that I could play every single note on the keyboard, because a koto is kind of limited in the note selection that it has, and it's not
a chromatic instrument.
Exactly. So I forced my patch to have those same limitations, and that helped it feel more authentic, you know. But and then
that's still a thing. I mean, that's exactly what Ilana Shkeri did, in even just on a compositional level for Ghost of Tsushima. It was literally, okay, there's certain notes that are just off the table now. So even if I'm writing some contrapuntal orchestral piece, that's still the rule. So you know,
it helps. It actually, I found it kind of inspiring in a way, you know.
Totally. Did you have any non-musical responsibility? Were you also doing sound design or anything like that? Or?
On that particular game, they hired another company to do the sound design, and then the sequel to it, which was Medieval Total War, they gave that responsibility to me, I think. And then from that point on, I would be, as the games got bigger, the amount of music required got bigger, and I would have less time to do sound design, so I would hire other people to help me with the sound design. I would always do some of it, though, because I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, sure.
And I liked how it, like, you know, the various aspects of doing video game audio is like, obviously there's the creative, the composing, there's sound design, and then there's implementation, the real technical side, and where you're messing around with, well, today we use Wise and Fmod and what have you. And I love that too. So I kind of just love digging around in all these things. That's why I began by saying
you're one of those frustrating people who can handle themselves in all these different departments.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's just because I love that sort of stuff. And
I think it's fantastic.
Shogun was like in the year 2000, and we did the sequel to it 10 years later in 2010, I think. And whereas the original Shogun was MIDI and samplers and stuff and little moments of live audio. I recorded all live players on Shogun 2, and in Australia I found a Japanese drum group called Thai Cause and recorded them in Sydney. And they were amazing musicians who worked in the local symphony as in the percussion department in Sydney. And but then their passion was Japanese music, and they would go to Japan and do these big drumming
Taiko
tours.
tradition is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And then these guys also held come learn taiko drumming for an afternoon kind of thing. And I signed up for it to just meet them. That was how I actually met them, is I signed up into their thing stealthy wise.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And then they were teaching me how to do the drumming with about 15 other people, and we're all sitting there banging away and having to like break your back, leaning back while you're playing, and really weird, awkward positions and big hand movements, which is counterintuitive.
It's very theatrical.
Oh, it is. It's very theatrical, but I really enjoyed it. And then after I waited till everybody was gone and it was just me and they were just packing up, I said, I'd like to hire you guys for a recording session if you wouldn't mind. And they were like looking at me a bit like, who's this guy? And then they looked into it and realized I was
weren't just random.
I wasn't just some random, and and they were really good. In fact, a lot of my knowledge is self-taught, and so there was this point where I had to provide scores for the music, and I was using, I forget what I was using. I think I was using Cubase at the time, and I just put all the MIDI into there, and there was some sort of score print.
Right.
Printed it, and I didn't really think through about the whole,
how horrible they look.
Oh yeah, and if you don't quantize things, you get these crazy looking things, and
these rhythms that look utterly unplayable.
Unplayable.
It's actually supposed to be just like a quarter note pulse.
Yeah,
and it actually looks like the most unbelievably syncopated, horrible thing in history.
Little like 64th note rests and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, so I showed up with these really ugly scores, and we had planned to do I think 2 days of rehearsal before going into the studio. That was my plan, because
that's atypical.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad I did it, because it felt like, well, if I was going to record a band in the studio, I'd go to the jam space and prepare and then go in the studio.
But
you know
also,
what I mean?
But the thing that's interesting though is you grew up watching those session players just sit. Granted, these aren't session taiko drummers.
Actually,
well, maybe they are.
They were, but the thing is I think actually it was more about making sure that my charts were right, that my score was right. And it turns out we spent almost the entire time correcting all the scores. So I have all the original printouts where most of it's blacked out and they've just handwritten what it should have been.
Yeah, some far simpler.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was. I learned a lot.
I think all of us have had that moment one time or another of just realizing, how did I overlook something seemingly so rudimentary, and thank God. I recently did a kind of a podcast thing where I was asking composers about a time where they really dodged a bullet, something that could have gone horribly. Like, imagine if you hadn't had those days and it was, we're on the clock in the studio.
Yeah.
We only have today.
Yeah.
The budget will be gone.
Yep.
And they're sitting there looking at these charts going, I can't make heads or tails of this. This doesn't look like any music I know.
Yeah.
You kind of got lucky, but we all have that story, one version or another.
Well, I find that reassuring, actually, that you say that.
Well, it's like if you do anything remotely interesting, you have to step into somewhere that you've not gone before.
That's right.
And so invariably, you're going to just make mistakes that immediately in hindsight, you go, that would have been, I should have seen that coming. But it's novel. It's all new. So how can that's the part that should be obvious.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think you have full reason to feel reassured that is a very common one.
Yeah. So
one of these won a BAFTA.
The first one did. Yeah. It was actually when we added the Mongol invasion add-on, I think, for Shogun the original Shogun. It's like 2001 or something like that. And that music, won a BAFTA for
Congrats.
for it.
I know
Thank you.
21 years late to congratulating you on that, but still, good on you.
Thank you. That was a total shock.
That has
it's
to
been
have been one of
interesting.
the very first
It was really early.
game BAFTAs.
Yeah,
I mean, I actually didn't realize. It makes me realize rather that I don't know when they started, but I always thought of it as a reasonably, because that, in the U.S. it's not like the Golden Globes have a video game category or something like that, but the BAFTAs are kind of the corollary to that, and they were always unusual in that they equally honored television, and there's not really. I mean, the Golden Globes kind of, I guess, are that for us, but Oscars are very much movies, Emmys are very much TV, Grammys are very much like records. So the BAFTAs have always been an outlier anyway, but still, like
it's
great. You were one of the first on deck, it sounds like.
It was very close to it. Yeah, I think it was only 1 year before, and
it's amazing.
Yeah, so I got very lucky there, and it's been in forever. It's always associated with my name in some sort of marketing material and stuff. It's always just there, it's an honor.
Would you prefer that they list I already forgot the name of it, the Genesis game that you were that you wrote music for first at EA in Vancouver? Would you prefer the little parentheses after your name list that one instead of
Shogun? No, that's fine. No, it's fine. I think the one you're thinking of is Skitchin. The reason why I brought up Skitchin is because a lot of people seem to like that one, and that's all.
So then maybe I'm right.
That one has is all like heavy rock music though.
That's so funny.
That was my introduction into rock music, and the designer on that game was trying to get me into the mood of it, and he was playing me a bunch of like Rage Against the Machine and stuff like that. Right. And I was like, "Oh, this sounds awesome!" And I got right into it. So,
Skitchin.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, at some point, obviously, the Creative Assembly relationship led to one of my favorite games of all time, which is Alien Isolation.
Yes.
But you were. That one, what's the story there? Because obviously that one, everything about that game is sort of unique and interesting.
Yes, that was a tumultuous project.
I've heard that from everyone I've ever talked to who worked on it. I had an opportunity years ago to meet Alice there.
Yep.
Because he just somehow. I can't remember. Maybe I just cold called and said, like, I just want you to know I'm a fan, because I think this was before it even came out, maybe, because I think what it was is the initial press release as they were winding up for release made mention that that Goldsmith's music had been licensed for that game.
Yes.
And that blew my mind, because I just thought that's so unusual. And it's also, I mean, even how many people would really even know that? Like, that's a length to go to that's catering to a kind of a niche, because you can make a great Alien game where people don't have they don't even know who Jerry Goldsmith is. As it turns out, he's like my all-time hero, and I'm obsessed with him. So that caught I remember reaching out and going, it sounds like you guys are playing to win on this thing. And then I played the game and was like, holy shit, this is the best Alien game anyone's ever made. Probably ever will make. It's amazing. I say that as someone who recently scored one of his own. Like, it's just so good. I just loved it. So yes, walk me through. Obviously, you've already got this, 15-year or however long, 10+ year running relationship with Creative Assembly.
Yep.
But this is a big departure for them.
Yes, huge departure, and it was interesting because when just to run it back a little bit in the Total War thing, I said there was like Shogun and then Medieval. Then I did Rome Total War, which was quite a
played the hell out of that game.
Yeah, that was a big game, and so and then for whatever, and at this point now, Creative Assembly had an office in Australia, and we were there. And
were you actually on staff?
On staff, okay. Yeah. So I was a full-time audio director, composer person, and I worked for them for about 10 years or so. And but then the Australian office was told to start working on an Olympics game. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to sports.
Serve your time.
And so it was like, I said, I'm out of here, guys. And then the guys in the UK said, oh, well, if you're not going to work for the Australian office anymore. Would you be our audio director in the UK? But you could do it from Australia. And I went, okay. And that's when I did Shogun 2. And that's then also when I did Alien Isolation. So I was in Australia, and they were all in.
You were doing the remote work before it was hip and cool.
Yeah, I was, and I've been still doing it, And, but I was being an audio director over Skype with a really awesome audio team in the UK, and basically every 6 months I would go over and spend a month over there.
When did it start?
Well, yeah. So, let's see. It launched in 2013, I think. But I mean, I think this game was actually in development for about 5 years.
Yeah, okay.
Because it was other things before it became Alien.
Right.
And
it happens all the time.
You know what I mean? And it was really interesting what they were doing. And plus, they were also building their own engine. They didn't use Unreal or something like that. They actually built the engine from the ground up, which was hugely challenging because
there's a reason why people use Unreal and Unity.
Exactly. So they were, in some ways reinventing the wheel, but they wanted, for whatever reason, to own and make their own tech, And so we had to wait a long time for the tools to be online to do it. So that was part of the reason why it was a bumpy road.
Sure.
And then my physical distance from them was making it difficult. I had to be kind of become nocturnal to be in sync with them a lot.
I mean, that's one of the most aggressively disparate time zones that's possible.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I mean,
opposite ends of the world.
during the kind of midpoint the pandemic, a year ago, give or take, I do a podcast. I do separate from this show. I do a show with 4 friends, one of whom's from Australia. She's actually from Brisbane. And she went to be with her family, to kind of hunker down with her family during a stretch of the pandemic because she could remote work. So she was there. And then I was in Los Angeles, and then one of our other folks is in the UK, lives in Manchester.
Yep.
And so finding a time that could work basically meant that, it had to be fairly late for him. Yep. And she would watch the sunrise during our show consistently. Especially when she first arrived and she had to do this 2-week quarantine because of COVID. Australia was obviously very aggressive about that.
Yep.
And so she was in this high-rise hotel, and literally during the course of the podcast, it'd be pitch black. You could barely see her to the point of now it's all blown out from the white balance because it's just in this direct sunlight because we record for an hour or whatever. And I remember thinking, it just made me appreciate the awkwardness of the time zone difference. And so hearing you talk through it, I think that would be, how could you not just become a vampire, basically?
Yeah, and I did. And also I had a young family at this point too, and so, and I went over, I actually seriously considered moving to the UK, and then I kind of decided no, that I didn't want to do that to my family, because Australia is a beautiful place and they were really happy. They were. So I just didn't want to do that. So there was a point where I was working on, I was actually writing the music for Alien Isolation as part of, because that was part of the deal. So I was going to write it. And I said, you know what, guys, I'm not going to be able to finish this game because I can't keep working like this. And so I left the project early on, and they hired another person to take over for me. And then there was issues with that, and 6 months later, they asked me to come back for a bit, and I helped out, and also at this point, they had found another set of composers at this point to take over. The Flight. That's exactly right. And they did a spectacular job.
Oh yeah,
they did a spectacular job, and they recorded at Air Studios, I think, and it just sounded amazing. So look, I mean, in the end, that was probably the right call. My version of what that music was going to be a lot more analog, for lack of a better word.
They seem to be in no disparagement meant, kind of Goldsmith homage territory. It was very
Well, we had licensed the themes.
Right. But even outside of when the theme appears, just the aesthetic of the score as that kind of very textural, orchestral
for sure.
approach.
And they also, apparently some of the players that played in those sessions were at the original Goldsmith sessions, which is
fantastic.
just and also, just a side note, do you know the story about the soundtrack in Alien?
In terms of the massive hatchet job Ridley Scott subjected it to.
Yeah,
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know that a bunch of the music that's in the theatrical release is actually from a different movie.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah, Jerry literally said he'd never work with Ridley Scott again.
He hated him. There was another movie called Freud.
Yep.
And
Jerry's first Oscar nominated score.
Yeah.
You're in my wheelhouse now, man.
Yeah.
So I'll talk Goldsmith with you all day.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan as well. And so you know all about this, and it's a fascinating story. I don't know if we'll go into it in depth here, but if people are listening, that's a very interesting story. The way that all transpired.
It's very funny where in composer circles, the story often gets circulated as this kind of like Jerry got jerked around and was very unappreciative of how he was treated by Ridley and the editor in particular, whose name I'm forgetting.
I want to say Terry.
Yeah, Terry Rollins.
Something like that. Yeah.
Who were very cavalier in, let's just take half of this cue, or this giant finale sequence that you wrote the music for. Let's just not use the music there, and just really treating it as though he wouldn't have any emotional investment in any of that, and then you can watch, there's like a behind the scenes and they talk about it and you can see interviews with them and you see Terry Rollins kind of go, we were working on the movie and Mr. Goldsmith he wasn't fond of the choices that we were making. So it has such a very kind of euphemistic spin on it. And it's like, Jerry literally swore he'd never work with Ridley over this. And he got begged to come back for Legend. And of course it all happened again. Then they definitely didn't work together again. And but I remember there was that whole story of they had temped the movie with Freud and things like that.
Yes.
Thinking that Jerry would like that, thinking, it's cool. Thank you for not putting John Williams in the temp or something and letting it kind of, but Jerry actually was disturbed by that because he thought, you make this harder for me because it's music I already kind of solved a problem with. And now I have to come up with a new solution that's not that music. And it would be a lot easier if I had a starting position that was something else.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. I feel for the guy because that would have been, I'm pretty sure you and I would both hate to be put in that situation, you know what I mean? Where you've written, put your heart into one movie and did something amazing, and then write stuff for this new movie, and they went, well, actually, that didn't really work for us. We've gone with this other stuff you've done previously. You know what I mean?
And not just previously. I mean, Freud is like 1964 or something like that. I mean, it was 15 years earlier. I mean, you're a different person from that kind of span. So it's kind of like, don't you want something that reflects where I've grown to and who I am? And, because Jerry was always such a producer as a composer as well.
Sure.
And Alien is such an amazing testament. All the elaborate recording of the Echoplex and all that kind of stuff.
That's
and just really, really detailed work. And,
it was.
That would have been different on Freud. Just the toys at your disposal would have been very different in the 60s versus 79.
Yeah.
I always love the fact as a tangent that like the two seminal sci-fi films of 1979, Jerry did both of. Because on the other hand is also Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is like as opposite of Alien as anything you could name in a musical vocabulary sense.
That's a fantastic theme too.
It's sort of his one flag in the lunar surface that is pop culture. It's like that's his claim to fame. He's always someone who's criminally underappreciated and underexposed to the average person. Like they've never heard of it. If you go ask a random, even a film buff, they may not know who he is. Whereas they'll know Hans Zimmer, they'll know John Williams, they'll know Danny Elfman.
Yep.
But to me, Jerry was just always the king. I mean, literally, I have a painting of him in the wall in my studio.
I don't blame you. He's, because I mean, he did so many quintessential themes to all these amazing TV shows back then. And and they were all different from each other and all had such personality. Just fascinating how consistent he was, you know?
Yeah. And just the fact that he could so on demand reinvent himself. You know, it's like every score was written as though he had no prior experience that would lead him to kind of develop patterns like, oh yeah, you know, this is kind of like, this is a very typical of me hook or riff or rhythm or whatever. It's like he has lots of little signatures, but at the same time, everyone was just so fresh that it was like a different person each time. It's just, so was it whose idea was it to actually go to the trouble of licensing?
Oh, I think that was Alistair. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay, so that wasn't, that's because it feels like a thing a composer would have advocated for.
Oh,
like,
I see what you mean. Yeah, no,
like, I was looking if that was your idea.
You know, I would like to take credit for that, but no, I'm pretty sure Alistair, because I mean, we wanted, we needed full license to show everything from the movie and have it inspire the movie. Interestingly enough, we took, when we were working on early prototype versions of the game, we took music from the soundtrack, the final soundtrack, I suppose, and put it into the game and had it playing in the background while we're running around in the game and stuff. And we thought, yeah, this is going to feel awesome, and it actually didn't quite feel awesome. Mostly because there was a massive mismatch in the production quality. From where we are now to the fact that all that original stuff is in mono. Right. And
interesting.
And, you know, decidedly lo-fi.
Right.
You know, and whereas the Alien Isolation is this interesting hybrid of sort of hi-fi, lo-fi, you know.
Oh yeah, I love things like the film grain and
that's right,
the
and that's
frame rate. And
yes, except that actually the resolution of the game is really high and the frame rate's really high and there's amazing lighting.
I thought it was 24 frames. Yeah. I thought it was,
actually, I don't know if they maybe they did, but
like as an intentional cinematic thing.
Yeah,
I could be remembering that wrong, but I definitely remember the film grain for sure.
Yeah, oh, for sure. That's
and like
definitely
that Fox
there.
Logo when it first came out, I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is so a game made by people that know what they're doing.
Yes, and that was, and you know, like Alistair's sort of catchphrase was CRT, not LCD. You know, and that was it. And he just kept basically saying that or versions of that to everybody, and he really synchronized the team on the aesthetic, both visually and audibly, and he was a joy to work with on that.
It sounds like you kind of, it's a very interesting and unique story that I can't really think of any other person that would have a kind of analogous example where you did what is a very difficult thing for a composer and an artist to do, and to say, you know, I think I need to step back from this. That's a gut punch, even if it's the right choice. And it sounds like it clearly was.
It was.
You know, taking care of your family and not relocating them halfway across the world, or deciding to just live like a vampire all the time. You know, a lot of composers, especially in your case, you know, I think something that, correct me if I'm wrong, would have exaggerated the difficulty of that decision too, is that would have entailed also quitting your job. Like you were not freelance and turning down one among several freelance contracts, but you were actually severing employment in the process. So it wasn't just even the creative roadblock that's being caused by just being a world apart and blah, blah, blah. But it's like literally, okay, I'm going to kind of reboot the construction of my life.
Yes.
It's big credit to you for having the courage to do that. And probably, you know, to me, it's, I don't know, if it had been 15 or 20 years earlier and you were younger and more hot-headed, I suspect you may have figured out a way or like aspired to figure out a way to muscle through it. But there's always something that I find is inspiring as I get older and as I just, my role models evolve. Someone who's kind of looking and taking stock and making an honest assessment and just makes the difficult call and doesn't have this self-destructive choice out of a otherwise admirable aspiration to, I want to do it all and conquer the world, you know? And so anyway, it's, I'm not really so much asking a question as
I appreciate
acknowledging that it couldn't have been easy.
It wasn't easy. It was consistent with what I did in '97 when I left EA, because that was.
But how exponentially easier that would have been then?
Well, because of youthful optimism, right? But I thought, well, if I've done this before and I survived, I think I can do this, you know, and I have a reputation now. Just to finish off what ended up happening with that is that in the end, they brought me back for the last sort of 2 months of the project and we finished off the final mix of the game. And the person that they had hired to replace me left, and they needed me to come back and help them finish it. So
in like an audio director capacity,
yes,
like oversee just the finalizing.
Exactly. And so and it felt great to be in the end, there at the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and also right at the end. And I, got my hands dirty and wise, helping with setting things up and with the final mix and stuff. And but the guys, I had such a great team on that project. Well, at least I guess I call them my team, but they were all employees of Creative Assembly. But they were all amazing and deserve the BAFTA that won. Because that was an amazing effort. But also, as you said, I did in fact quit my job.
Was that an audio? Was that there's always like music and audio as...
this was an audio for
I do
best
still
audio.
Remember it went, because I remember thinking, no duh. Like not even knowing what it took to get to the finish line and how difficult and everything. But just the final product.
Yeah,
every aspect of that game to me was essentially flawless. I didn't even agree with the people that felt it kind of dragged by the end, and
sure,
that was a consistent feedback I came across. And I thought, to me, it breezed by. It was like 21 hours or whatever of like that. I mean, it was.
That's cool.
The other thing that game did, just as forgive my nerding here for a second, but that game did what very few games have ever managed to achieve, which is it introduces an enemy fairly early on that is like impossibly difficult. You basically have to avoid it.
Yep.
And it manages to make that a consistently interesting through line for the entire game. You never get your Duke Nukem BFG and then just mow down the xenomorphs and it's like they become a non-issue. Every time they are extremely threatening and instantly fatal to the player and you don't, at least for me, I never fell out of love on account of that. I never thought, okay, now it's just annoying. Now it's like an impediment. It was like, no, this is scary and it's interesting. And I remember playing with my ex at the time. We would play on, I'd sit her on the couch next to me while I'd play, and we'd turn off all the lights. And for her, she was effectively watching an alien movie. And it scared the bejesus out of her. And it was so effective. And that made me enjoy it 10 times more because I'm like vicariously living off of her sort of electricity. And, I just loved it. It was so nailed.
Yeah.
So I love hearing that there's kind of a happy ending with your relationship with Creative Assembly and all that.
In the end, it was, I'm glad that that's how it ended up ending off. And interestingly, that was when I sort of went indie and I haven't looked back since.
And freelance.
Freelance.
I mean, you've started since your own outfit, right? Is that what I understand?
Yeah, I'm involved in a few outfits is what I've done.
Okay, got it.
Which is interesting. So I'm involved with a few developers, Witchbeam, who did Assault Android Cactus, which was the next game that we did after Alien Isolation. And then we've also gone on to do Unpacking.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. And then the other company is called Earthwork Games, and we do a little game called Forts, which is done quite well. It's just this little game that, for some reason, not a lot of people have heard of, but it's seemingly ticking along, and people are still buying it 5 years later. And I
love those.
And in fact, the last DLC we just did called High Seas, I didn't have time to do the music on it, so my daughter wrote the soundtrack.
Oh, no kidding.
Which is really cool.
Oh, that's amazing.
So the next generation is coming up, and so
you're obviously not good at the sort of jealous parent thing, worried about being supplanted and keeping their child down. That's a classic trope.
Power tour, let it go nuts, and then look after me when I'm older.
I see. Yes, this is a retirement investment. That's too funny. Well, so you had a little bit of a viral moment with Unpacking. I have not had a chance to play Unpacking yet.
Okay.
But about 1,000 people came to me all at once on Twitter because this game was selling itself from its sound design, which I don't think I've ever really seen before. But it's just the novelty. I think I saw Kevin Regami, if you know him.
I know Kevin.
Share a tweet that caught my eye of this. the elaborateness of this game is, first off, probably essential, because that's all there is to the game.
That's exactly.
So, it was like, well, what else could it be if not that? Because it's not like there's a multiplayer mode or something that is where we're going to put all our energy, or like the deathmatch mode, something like that. It's like, this one thing has to be. I remember this came up with Steve Johnson, the sound designer, when we were working on Journey, where, the amount of effort that went into thinking about the Foley of the footsteps in the sand. And it was like, this is the number one thing the player is going to hear from start to finish through this game. It better be somehow perfectly kind of innocuous, that it's not in your face all the time. But also, I remember Genova, the creative director, was very keen on it feeling very satisfying. He's like, I want to walk in the sand from the sound feedback. And it's one of those wonderful kind of dark arts of games and film and TV, and people, they see the Transformers, and the Ben Burt type work in the world, and it's very flashy and sexy and obviously incredible. But the nuance of things, like, I always remember the first time I remember playing a game, I don't know what game it would have been, but somewhere kind of in the 90s, we reached a point where, if in a first-person game, I'm running across a carpeted floor and I cross over onto like a marble floor, my footsteps changed. And I remember, as a person who was just kind of attenuated to audio, that caught me. And I thought, the system knew. Ever since then, those things have just gotten more and more elaborate. But this game was on a whole other level. I mean, the specific tweet was like 15,000 or 14,000 discrete assets or something like that. So first off, I just want to hear general thoughts about it. But the thing that I want to not forget to ask you is, when earlier you were saying the interactivity that real-time chip synthesis offers is so vast compared to recorded audio. And therefore, typically, as of now, the only real way to create something elaborately interactive is this kind of brute force, we just need a lot of content. In the same way that the writer, if you want a big elaborate branching RPG or something, you just have to write like 80,000 lines of dialogue. There's just no way around creating crazy amounts of content. And so that struck me as one of those cases where I said, if you want a game that's just so nuanced and so variable and so player has so much agency on even just these little fine-grained details, the way you do it is a thing where you end up with 14,000. So I want to hear about it in general, how you got involved and kind of where, the headspace. And you also wrote the score. I listened to, I didn't get a chance to hear the entire thing, but I listened to it. It was very nice. And I suspect that's what you were referring to when you said you got to go back to that stuff.
That was it.
It's really nice.
Thank you.
And really well produced. I mean, really loved the way the sound, those kind of choked chords in the guitar. I always struggle to record that in a way that sounds as good as how you did it. And
what's interesting about that is that I used a VST for that stuff, and when I was writing, and then I brought in my guitar player friend, and I couldn't get
the same problem.
I had the same problem. I couldn't get what he was doing. We tried different mics, different guitars, and I just went, you know what? There's something charming about the VST version.
So that's sample.
Those are samples.
That's so funny.
You know what I mean?
That same thing happened. It's actually weirdly comforting to learn that somebody who probably knows a lot more about the hardware than I do, and about mixing and engineering would have the same struggle. Because sometimes you hear a recording and the guitar sounds like an orchestra. It's just so lush and amazing.
Yes.
And that's one of those. It's one of those things I haven't quite somehow conquered. And so this was Elliot Goldenthal, he won the Oscar for Frida, the movie about Frida Kahlo with Salma Hayek. And I remember having the same exact question on that in 2002. And it's also samples in that score on some of them, on some of the rhythm, kind of where they found a sample they liked and they just... They couldn't reproduce it, so they used it.
That's interesting.
And which I thought was very funny. So this is apparently a timeless problem, but
I think so. And the way I justified it is I thought, well, it's in line with the fact that the other chip sounds are artificial. That the guitar, even though it sounds natural, still has an artificialness to it. That was the way I justified it.
Whatever helps you sleep at night.
Exactly.
So how did that one come to be, and where did you step in? How early? And was there a conception that it was going to be that elaborate from the start?
No. The key word here, from my point of view, was underestimation, all the way right from the get-go. I looked
up
at
to
it,
and including the response. I hope.
Absolutely, including the response. And I saw a game where you just pick up cups and plates and stuff and pick them up and put them away. And I thought, okay, well, I need a pickup sound, I need a place sound, and then I went, oh, I see. You can place these things on different surfaces, so we're going to have different sounds there. Okay, that's fine. And the prototype we're working on was a kitchen level, and I've gone into my kitchen and I recorded all my things in my kitchen. I'm going to go into this in great detail in my talk tomorrow, by the way.
I'm planning on being there.
And
this is the warm up.
Yeah,
this is where you can get all the bugs out of the system.
That's right. And so basically, I thought I had nailed it. It was sounding nice, and then the designer said, "Oh, we're adding each level is going to have different rooms. So there's going to be like kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and there's going to be 8 different levels, and there's going to be like 500 or 600 items in the game, and probably about 15 surfaces." And the numbers just started multiplying in my head, right? And I realized also that I can't record this. When I can't record all this stuff in each room, because that's just going to be literally millions of sounds. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll record it all in a dead room. We used a spare bedroom to record it. And I'll add all the ambience or the reflections and stuff artificially, which turned out to be the right choice, to just keep the number of sounds down to a low number of 14,000.
Yeah, exactly.
And because it could have been way worse. And
I mean, that if everything had to be a 1-to-1 match of what's possible,
and that was my initial intention, because I wanted that detail. Because I realized quite quickly that all you do in this game is pick stuff up and put it down. There's a bit of
it raises an interesting. It raises an interesting question. I love sitting in on the kind of general audio, team meetings where, as someone who really only does music, it's still fascinating. I was working on a game that's a side scroller, but it's not that the player's fixed in position and the world is moving by on a treadmill. The player can move around. So it very much became this question of, when a sound effect, if the player goes up and like smashes something, what is the point of view for, where, like, does the camera hear that, or are we in the avatar POV? Where are we placing the sound? And it's one of those that, until you think about it, you may not ever think about a question like that, or at least unless you're in our kind of line of work here.
True.
And so the first question that raises, like that is the question that Unpacking then raises, where I could see a thing where, okay, we're in a pretty live space right now, despite all sort of felty surfaces in here. It's remarkably reflective.
Yep.
And I have a little empty paper cup. So if you can hear a lot of reflection of that on the ground. If you wanted to capture the space, you set up like surrounds over in those corners or whatever, you'd get a real good sense, in tandem with something close. You could really do what you were talking about that you had to abandon.
Yeah.
But the question is, what the game has this perspective where you're kind of, it's like The Sims, where you're sort of this omniscient presence outside of the space. You're not in it. So then,
well, you're in the room, obviously with the items.
But it's not like a first person.
No. It's a third person view, I suppose. Yeah.
So it just raises the question then of like how much of the space beyond the surface became crucial in order to capture the perception of where the listener is.
Yeah. I think it was. We absolutely had to have that in there, and because when you go into a kitchen, kitchens are ambient. They're echoey because of all the hard surfaces.
Yep.
And you go into a bedroom, the bed soaks up all the ambience, all the reflections and stuff. So as soon as we added that difference, it just made everything feel more engaging and natural. So we needed to record everything dry. And we needed to record everything on each surface. What we realized, though, is like what we didn't need to do is like, we all have a bunch of different coffee cups, right? I didn't need to record all the different coffee cups. I just needed one, and just lots of variations of that one.
Yeah.
And when you grab the other ones, even though they're slightly different shapes, it doesn't faze you that they are triggering the same set of sounds because there's so many variants.
Sure.
They all sound a little bit different to each other. So we stopped.
How many variants would you typically make?
I would record 10. And actually when I say
object per surface.
Yeah, exactly. And when I say I was recording it, actually my wife, Angela, did most of the recording.
14,000, that's a lot of hours.
It's a lot of hours. I didn't have time to do it. I had time to help design the process and the system, and then Ange and I, did a lot of to and fro about how things were organized and stuff. But ultimately, once we had kind of our workflow, she's the one that ran through it and did it all, which is amazing.
Out of curiosity, just from a purely, again, it's a sort of a logistics thing. Did you record that by having essentially a field recorder set up in your bedroom, or did you like wheel in a Pro Tools rig?
Yeah, it was. Initially, I tried using a little DA40 field recorder, a little Tascam. Turns out the inputs on it were a little bit noisy. So I just had a laptop and an interface, and we, so I mean, I suppose it was that, but it's just, audio gear.
A mobile rig,
yeah. Yeah, it was a mobile rig.
What kind of mic did you use for this?
It was the Sennheiser 8040, just the little black thing. Sennheiser 8040, I think that's what it was. And beautiful sounding mic. The first mic I used in my kitchen was a Rode NT2A, which is like a vocal mic. Right?
I've used one for 10 years worth of.
Beautiful mic, great mic, meat and potatoes kind of mic, right? And it captured a lot of the ambience in my kitchen. It actually sounded quite nice because it was natural ambience. Unfortunately, I had to bail on it because that mic does tend to capture a lot of the room.
Yep.
Whereas the 8040 was much more, a tighter pattern.
Near field, right? Sure.
Exactly. So, and I didn't want any sound of the room we were recording in. So that's, so we basically what kept on happening is that the game's kind of scope got a little bit bigger and a bit bigger, and it got too big for me to handle by myself. So I got Angela to help me with that. And that's how we, because that was her sole focus, she put her head down and went through the process of recording. How long did that
take?
I mean,
tens of thousands.
This is the other part of the talk is how we saved a lot of time using Reaper and some good use of dynamic splitting and batch processing and what have you. And so while she did there's no doubt she did a lot of recording and a lot of editing, but there's lots of parts of the process that were automated that helped rein in. Amazing. So, but I think basically she worked on it maybe 3 or 4 months, I think, pretty solid, to get through all of that stuff. Yeah, it was a lot of work, and then getting it all into Wise. We used Wise, and again, that was another part that we automated. And the way we had set it up is everything was non-destructive because I wasn't sure exactly what we wanted to end up with audio file wise. And I wasn't sure if, we're going to have space issues. I mean, who knew, right? So, and I wasn't sure, just like volume ranges and, stereo or mono, all these sort of things. So I just didn't want to print anything to tape, so to speak, right?
Right.
And the way we set it up is it was very flexible, basically, for lack of a better word. And so then I was able to focus on the music, and on the music side, we decided to do chip tunes meets the acoustic guitar, and then there's a few characters in the game, and I did that thing where you assigned an instrument to a character, and that just sort of helped give me a structure to work with from level to level in the game. And the other thing is the character. We follow a character's life. We never meet this character. You never see her. She doesn't say anything. There's no text from her or anything. You only learn about her by unpacking her stuff, which is where this is what's captured people's thing. It's just, it's like
it's an oddly emotional game for people.
Incredibly emotional.
Like in a very, it's a game that when you look at some, like GIF of it or a little snapshot on Twitter of a 5-second little video.
Yeah.
It looks like one of those where you go, okay, it's another one of those indie games where somebody took like a kind of an almost ironically banal thing and said, what if we made a game out of that? Like, what if I made a game about doing the dishes? Or what if I made a game about, like, there's a certain kind of indie developer that is trying to learn what's the thing. Like, you remember that movie Boyhood? Like, let's just look at little snapshots of a kid's life over a 12-year period. There's no real plot. There's no real, it's just kind of, and similarly, by the time I got into that movie, I was like so invested and so moved by just watching normal life.
Yes.
And there's something so beautiful about just kind of seeing a human being. And of course, in that case of that movie, it was because it was literally the kid was growing up. I mean, you filmed it over like a 12-year period.
Yeah.
So the actor is evolving and again, I sadly have not had a chance to play Unpacking yet, but I keep hearing that the thing that makes me so excited to check it out was that everyone said it presents itself as if it's just this kind of kitschy thing, or at least it's easy to think that it might be, and then people get so invested and moved.
It's all about it's a really amazing use of environmental storytelling.
Yep.
You're like an archaeologist uncovering this story and interpreting it too. And the way you play it and your interpretation might be different to mine, which is also interesting because people then have discussion of that.
How much of that was baked in from the premise when you signed on? Or this was like a discovery of what this was a discovery?
Be? Yeah, exactly. And I think even for the game designers, because, Ren has said that she came up with the idea when Tim moved in with her. They were putting his stuff away, and firstly, she finds tidying up and having things just so in a shelf and stuff, like she finds that relaxing. And it's a thing. Like, people find having things
Kondo kind of
exactly. Like make it all just orderly, and it's in a certain order and color aesthetic. Some people call it OCD. I don't know if it's OCD with her, but it's definitely,
there's a spectrum there. I think.
I wouldn't say. It's all I mean is that it's. She has said to me that it's a process that she finds relaxing, and exactly. They immediately, like, Tim went, oh, okay, I'll have a go at making that into a game, and he's our programmer and designer as well, and he actually started making it a reality, and then they started putting in items, and I think it was during that process they started to realize that there's a story behind the items, and then they came up with this really neat story that people really like, and I really like the story.
Where in the process did you get involved in?
I was there, almost from the very start, and when they showed me a rough prototype of it working, and they said, could you make some sounds for this and some music that we could put in, and we're gonna, they ended up going to this thing called Shogun in Sweden, I think, which is like a workshop thing that you do for like 2 months, and you bring your prototype game, and all the devs and stuff like look at each other's games and just totally.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting actually. They had a great time, and then you got friends for life from doing that kind of thing, And they did that, and they came back, and I think what they had plans on actually finishing the game there, but actually in the end, I think they came back with just a much more focused version of what they arrived with, but a lot more clarity on what the full game design should be. And that's when they started saying, we're going to have all these different levels and these different rooms and these items. Some items are going to follow this character throughout their whole life, which says something about those items. Some items are going to go away. New things will appear. And I mean, really the thing is too, and this is where I think it relates to all of us, is when you're following this person's life, we all have like these keyframes or bookmarks in our life, like the first place you moved out, when you moved out of home, right? Or if you move, and then, so for our character, she goes to uni and goes into a dorm with, scratched walls and right near noisy traffic and stuff. And then she graduates and moves in with roommates, and that whole thing. And then she moves in with her first boyfriend, and somehow we managed somehow the designers had managed to make possibly the most hated boyfriend on the internet, purely because of the way they, I'm not going to give out any spoilers, but basically he annoyed everybody on the internet, which is amazing. And purely by just unpacking stuff and putting it away.
I so love this about games as an art form, that, I see the various awards shows that will often have a kind of like category of best, innovation in story, where the idea is, how can we tell a story? Games gives you the opportunity to tell a story in just about any way that you can imagine someone interacting with a piece of software. Mm-hmm. So whether it's telling a story by triggering cutscenes and doing something that's extremely cinematic and very kind of familiar as a way to think, or something like this, which, you go back not that long ago and explain a game like this to somebody. You go back to the mid 90s and say, we're going to make a game that's about unpacking, people think you're out of your mind. They'd either go, I just can't see it, or they'd say, that sounds like maybe the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. And it is truly amazing. Well, so one last thing to ask about it that comes to mind that's very interesting thing that you somehow managed to outmaneuver. It sounds like it's really well organized, just based on what you were saying in terms of the things you're going to be getting into with Reaper and your talk. And I'm curious, one of the things that is a constant problem in game design is as scope increases, which often there's a good reason for it. Like you realize, if we just did this, we'd have an exponentially better game. Like it's no longer just move things around and put them on surfaces because I find that act cathartic, but we can actually tell a story. We can actually get something that's really emotionally involved. And so you follow those roads. That's one of the things that makes games so difficult to make is you round a bend of an idea and you discover this is definitely what we want to make. But it turns out this is way more complicated now and way more sort of resource demanding, and it's going to take 3 times longer than the game was gonna if we hadn't turned that corner. This is a common problem. Yep. And there's no real fix because part of it is just you make discoveries and then the costs associated, you have to decide if you're going to chase that or not. And if you decide to, it's just gonna balloon a bit. And but it sounds like you managed to avoid the normal pitfalls. At least it sounds like that of, hey, this thing is originally going to be this scope. So I'm going to, it's like, how much gas are you going to put in the car? If I only need to go 5 miles, I don't need to go buy $1,000 worth of gas as if I was trekking across in a continent. And so, and we have this problem all the time. You realize, oh crap, I actually, to finish off the analogy, it's like, if you realize I don't have enough gas to get to the finish line because it turns out the destination is a lot farther, rather than go and run out, I have to go back to where I started, buy a different car that can have that kind of gas and go. And so many times the delays on these games are caused when you realize to satisfy that scope, we essentially have to tear down what we've built and build it again, because it can't just scale infinitely. How did you avoid that if this thing kept constantly being bigger than expected? It's not a linear path a lot of the time.
No, but I guess it might be one of the benefits of being indie and small is the costs can be lower. Most people on the team are working for future potential. Like there's quite often a lot of people in indie are working for free until they release their game.
Yeah, I'm all too familiar.
Us included. Actually, I think Unpacking was mostly funded by the sales of our previous game, Assault Android Cactus.
Right.
And we got a grant from the government in Queensland.
They're very aggressive about supporting their local arts.
As they should be.
I've been on the receiving end of that before, and it's pretty amazing.
But it wasn't huge amount. It wasn't millions of dollars. And
no, but it can make the difference of a small team having runway.
Exactly. It was enough to just keep us along. And also everybody kind of just, living lean for a while, although I suppose for myself, trying to be responsible dad and all that sort of stuff, I try to have a few irons in the fire so that,
It's the nature of a freelancer as well.
You know how it is.
Something delays, something's early.
But ultimately, as clarity came in terms of like the design and scope, things did extend, and there was a point where I had to go to my business partners and say, hey, I want to spend more on the Foley recording because it's bigger than I realized, and they all went, yep, understood, so, and they also at one point said, you know what, we are falling behind our sort of scheduled plan, so we hired another artist to help us, and we were just making the call to spend more money so we could finish this game. And if we didn't spend more money, we'd be still working on it.
But by the sound of it, believe me, I know that dance too. It can be very seductive, it's because it's just, you realize, I can, what's another 1,000 sounds at this point? You're already so far in,
Yeah. And I mean, we did, so we made that call, and I think it was the right call in the end. And I'm so glad that we did put all this extra energy into the Foley and stuff, because it's being so well received, and people are enjoying the efforts that we did.
Again, I'll just reiterate, I never saw a game go viral on account of its Foley.
Yeah. And one of the points I make in my talk is that, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, is that first-person shooters, lots of stuff happening, explosions, music, dialogue. We're not going to be able to hear the real cool, the way the footsteps and the Foley and the dirt, going up against the shoes and what have you, and you're just not going to get a moment to appreciate that. Whereas in this game, there's none of that stuff going on. Yep. All there is some birds tweeting outside and the room tone, and then my chip tunes, and now there's all this space for you to hear how that fork sounds different on every single surface. And because people have never had that sort of quiet, chilled space to just kind of contemplate that, and now they're going, wow, that's actually pretty amazing, and that's there. And I'm there to say is like, well, this is not new technology. I mean, games have been doing this for years. It's just that it just so happens in this particular game, there's so much space you can really notice it.
Well, and also it is the game as opposed to, Foley, which represents a level of polish in another game.
Yep.
Like if it's a first person shooter and I am holding an object and I drop it, we want to make sure that it drops onto, and the surface that it's dropping onto reflects the sound that gets triggered.
Yep.
But the game is like solve the mystery or like find the murderer or whatever. You're not thinking it would just ping if it was wrong.
That's right.
But it's not the game. It's
That's right.
It's not, what if I make a game about putting things on surfaces? I just think it's amazing. I just think it's so, I begrudge the fact that I haven't had a chance to play it before this chat, because I probably would have had 1,000 other questions, but I'll just have to chase you down for more.
Yeah, no worries.
But it's truly incredible. And it sounds like, what I was asking about was kind of particularly along the wavelength of if there was like a pipeline that would have had a big disruption about expanding in scope. But it sounds like it really just came down to, we just need the literal hours in the day to get through the sort of asset list, as it were.
It was kind of brute force, you know, but it needed that, and there was space for it. And I kind of had a hunch that people were going to like this, because it was so exposed, and so noticeable that even people who aren't audio people will notice it. And that's what's happened here, is that people have noticed this, and we have other things in there, you can pick up something and shake it and it rattles, It's such a simple thing that, but, and in the technology behind that is no different than if I was making a sample library of a shaker or a tambourine. Right. We used the exact same logic and same technology, except we used Wise to do it. Detected the speed of the mouse, and
so your mod wheel, basically.
Exactly, or velocity, you know what I mean? And so you can kind of jam along to the music when shaking something.
That's
right?
so funny.
There's just all those little things, and then we hid a lot of audio within some of the items. Like if you hit play on a cassette deck, it plays a song that matches what the character would be into at that time. So early on, you can kind of tell that maybe, and this is in 1997, the kid was maybe, I don't know, 8 years old, and they're into Aqua, so I had to write some songs that were in line with different pop music at different eras and stuff.
How does that work from a mixing standpoint? If you have a non-diegetic score cranking along, and then the player can theoretically, do you just collide them?
I tried that. I tried that. I didn't like it. So basically, the sort of background music, as to say, gets muted when you hit play on the tape recorder, and now the sound is 3D, and wherever you move it, you feel it pan and stuff. And if you turn the speaker away, it gets a bit muffled, and it's all that sort of stuff. If you go into another room, you can still hear it in the other room, a bit quiet and muffled and stuff. And then when it stops, the background music just comes back on with just a quick fade. So it's a simple solution, but and it works.
Well, and it's also it also doesn't obscure to the player what they're doing. That's always the challenge with a thing like that. Is you can come up with something super clever, but the legibility of what you've just done to the player might be hidden, and therefore they don't really appreciate like, oh, how cool that you kind of blended the two, and all they know is it's like kind of messy or something.
Yeah, actually, there's a funny thing is there was a streamer on YouTube who was in one of the levels, and this is a level where the main character is feeling pretty good about themselves. Sorry, they're feeling pretty good because they're moved into their own place and feeling like their career's starting to go, and so I wrote this sort of kind of punk rock song that's kind of got a lot of energy, and the streamer played it, and she's like nodding along while she's playing, and then she goes into another room, and the music's playing quieter now because she's moved. So she's gone, and she went back and grabbed the speaker and moved it into the room, and now she's working here. And then she moved to another room, and she had to keep taking the speaker with her to listen to the music in the room, which is like a form of gameplay or something.
Yeah,
but that I didn't really prepare for or think was going to happen. But I did like the fact that the music was playing in this thing that you could move around, and it was really fun to watch them discover that. Then also they just happened to really like that song, and which is called Yeah, Nah, and
I love those kinds of moments. It's sort of emergent play. They do something with it that it wasn't necessarily designed for, but it's completely compatible with.
Yes.
Again, that's one of those things that's so unique to games.
Yes.
It's not like I can discover something really cool by watching a movie at a different playback speed or something, typically, or whatever. It's just not even really even a crude equivalent. And I never get tired of those stories. Well, I can't thank you enough. This is just loaded with with great stuff, and of course your GDC talk will like people will hear it before they have a chance to hear this. This will be however many weeks or whenever from now. But hopefully your GDC talk is one of those that ends up on YouTube, and the whole world can
I think
follow
it will.
up on their interest.
Yeah, I think they release them like after a year or something like that, or I don't know how exactly it works, but
it seems like lately they've been finding their way onto, and so hopefully people. But
it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you and get to know you a little bit.
It's rare to have the chance to meet somebody for the first time with this, and yet be also very familiar with their work. Because never mind Isolation, I was also a big player of especially Rome, but even Shogun back in the day. So it's a real pleasure, and I absolutely also just love. The career arc of games like that, and really high profile title like Isolation, and then a game that couldn't be more quintessentially indie as Unpacking. I mean, it's just I can't be hard pressed to name a game that couldn't have been made any other way than the way the indie world works. And, it's just what big AAA publisher would greenlight a game like that? I mean, it's so. And that's not a disparagement of the AAA world. It's just like, I love that we live in a world that has these parallel lanes, that if you want to go make a Horizon, you know, that's really, really ambitious on every level, there's a lot to do. Or like, you know, Insomniac's like Spider-Man and Miles Morales, or God of War. So, you know, there's just a Halo. There's so many titles that could never be made independently. And then somebody, who's like, you know, I wonder if I made a game out of my experience that I just personally find cathartic of placing things on shelves and making it look nice. And I love being in this moment in the industry.
It's a great time because like the industry has noticed that actually some games can be relaxing. Games can be like reading a book, or, you know, games don't have to be, you know, it doesn't have, I mean, those are fun too, but like,
couldn't agree more.
And, you know, we're finding a lot of women like Unpacking, which is fantastic. It's refreshing. You know, the Discord is full of friendly women talking to each other, being supportive of each other, and
those games
which
that
is
are an entry
you know
point
what I mean?
to new audience. You know,
Exactly. So we've appealed to a whole other audience, which is you know, because and it's been great. So I think you're right that this game probably couldn't have existed up until now, you know, because of that. And we're kind of realizing, it's really good to have some games that exist purely to just chill out and relax.
Yeah. Well, congrats on it.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
Hopefully there's a slew of mixing and sound design awards and things in your future for it.
I guess we'll see.
But congrats and thanks again for doing this.
Thank you.